atmosphere. It is a pleasure to be here with you on this last webinar for the year. After a big effort covering, spanning 3 years or more of bringing you important points for the to be better prepared to prevent and respond to African swine fever outbreaks. This is an interagency effort developed within the framework of the GFSTAT, ICA, in coordination with different agencies like SWOA, FAO, CAN, CARIVET, CAFSA, COPEC, CDP, USDA, OIRSA, has been bringing these webinars to you so that you can all have access to firsthand information thanks to high-quality experts, very experienced in this subject matter. Today, we will be talking about the depopulation and disposal of animals. We have a panel of experts, a very good panel of experts. I hope you enjoy it. The modality of webinars is, aside from broadcasting this via Zoom right now, this is also being streamed through the ICA website via YouTube, both in English as well as in Spanish and Portuguese and French. So please feel free to send all your questions to us via the chat. And we have two chats. So we have the conventional chat and the Q&A chat at the bottom of your screen. So at the end of the presentations, we will have the opportunity for a Q&A session. John Clifford, he is the only one that will have to leave quickly after his presentation, but the rest of the panelists will be with us the rest of the session. So without further ado, allow me to begin with the first presentation of the day. We will hear about the foundations of depopulation and disposal of animals. Dr. Dari Flori, who has worked with the ICA and has been involved in corpse disposal and other matters. A brief summary of Dr. Flori's bio. He is founder of Global Outbreak Solutions, a consulting company focusing on response and research on animal diseases, transboundary and zoonotic diseases. He has supported initiatives in animal health in more than 24 countries, collaborating with global organizations such as the UNFAO, as the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, the World Animal Health Organization, WOA, and IICA, as well as the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO. Aside from this, Gary is part of the global group of experts in African swine fever, FAO, and is a key researcher at the Institute of Infectious Diseases and Animal Diseases in Texas, and is worked on a series of guidelines the composting of animal corpses, and his experience is very well known. He has practical experience, practical solutions, and collaborative approach to challenges represented by complex diseases and natural disasters. Gary's work allows him to connect to people worldwide and also foster sustainable solutions for sanitary emergencies. So with this presentation, Gary, go ahead. Please share your screen.
All right, gracias, Erika. Buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias a Erika
Good
por la
morning,
oportunidad de estar
Erica.
aquí
Thank you, Ika,
con
for the
todos.
opportunity to be here with you all.
Desafortunadamente, no
Unfortunately,
hablo español bien,
I do
por
not
eso
speak
voy
that
a
that
hablar en inglés.
such good Spanish, so I will go into English.
All right. Eric, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can
Okay,
see it.
well, very good. So today we're going to just
Welcome.
introduce you to the topics of depopulation and disposal. I love questions, so please take the opportunity that was provided earlier to type your questions into the chat box because I'd love to have the opportunity to go through those at the end. So again, we're going to talk very quickly. This is a topic that I often spend a week-long workshop talking about these topics. So we're going to go through it very quickly, but I want to introduce the ideas and hopefully give you some things that you can take back as you move forward. All right, so we've already introduced myself, so I'm not going to do that. But what we'll talk about here, some of the depopulation methods, focusing on the newer ones, also some ways to manage mortality that offer some benefits over some of the traditional methods. And then I'm going to provide a few resources for you. So we'll start with those depopulation methods. One that most of you are familiar with is captive bolt. Captive bolt is a tool that has been around for quite some time. And when we talk about African swine fever, it still poses some benefits and some opportunities. But there are some things to keep in mind. There are two types of captive bolt. There's the non-penetrating captive bolt. So in essence, the bolt that discharges from the gun, it does not penetrate the skull. So death is by that percussion, not the penetration into the brain tissue like captive or like penetrative captive bolt. Because of that, it really is just intended for smaller animals, so suckling pigs, if we're talking about from the swine side. Okay, so that is an option, but primarily just for those young animals. The next type of captive bolt is the one that is most used and most appropriate, and that's the penetrative captive bolt. So you can see here that is more appropriate for the larger animals, and it does offer considerable benefits because it is commonly available. It's not as expensive as a lot of the techniques that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. However, the challenge with a captive bolt and really any method that involves depopulating individual animals is the resources that it takes. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort, physical effort. So we can wear our responders down very, very quickly when we rely on an individual animal method. Also, when we're talking about diseases, any method that has the potential to expose body fluids to the environment or to other animals has some potential for disease spread. So that's sort of the downside of captive bolt. For backyard producers or smaller producers, this does offer an opportunity, but it can be challenging if we're talking about large commercial operations. The most important thing about captive bolt from an animal welfare standpoint is it does need to be done well. We need to use the right type of captive bolt gun. So they come in different calibers, different charges, so that you do need to apply a different charge to a feeder pig versus a boar, for example. So we need to make sure that we apply the technique well. Positioning, as you can see here on the right, is critical. The next thing I want to talk about is gunshot. So gunshot is a tool that can be used in our response to African swine fever. It offers some benefits in terms of availability. From an implementation standpoint, there are times that we involve a number of different individuals to help that response that we might not normally have during an animal disease response. We might look to our wildlife services people. Places that I've worked, they've looked to their police departments, they've looked to their army to help support those activities. So that can provide some outside human resources. But again, positioning from an animal welfare standpoint is critical. We do want to make sure that we are very intentional about how we are shooting those animals to make sure that it is humane. The other thing that is important to understand is whenever we use gunshot, we do have the body fluid issue again, particularly as we talk about ASF and other diseases. We do want to minimize the body fluids that can be exposed to the environment. But probably the biggest concern with gunshot is worker safety. So we need to be very, very cautious about how we implement gunshots. And it's really best to have professional, skilled sharpshooters involved if you're going to use gunshot because of the human safety aspect of that. Electrocution is another method that has been used around the world in regards to ASF outbreaks. I've seen it most in Southeast Asia. I've seen it done well with, here's a commercial unit that was being used in Vietnam, manufactured in China. So generally speaking, what we want to use is a single step method, which is not the typical method of electrocution where we might be looking at two different stages. But again, it is important to do this intentionally, to do this humanely. Unfortunately, in response to African swine fever, when countries haven't been prepared, I have seen some horrendous implementation of electrocution with electrical cords that are severed and alligator clips uh, placed on the ends for using that. That obviously has very significant and very horrible animal welfare implications, but the human safety aspect can be awful as well. Blunt trauma. Blunt trauma is another method that is used quite frequently. Blunt trauma may have a place, but there are only very specific places where blunt trauma is considered humane. So here we're talking about suckling pigs, so very, very young animals. And it really is not a method that is encouraged for any animals beyond that very young age. So let's talk about some new methods, some different methods that have been implemented primarily for disease outbreaks and larger situations where we have multiple animals. Again, I mentioned before that when we think about a disease outbreak, it's really important to focus on methods that can depopulate groups of animals humanely instead of focusing on individual animals, and that improves the response. It helps you from the safety standpoint and also from the implications on your workforce. So, the first thing I want to talk about is the inhalant gases. Number of things that we need to think about is that these gases do need to be contained. So, what sort of system or container are we going to use in order to contain those animals and to contain the gas? The other thing that we need to think about is how are we going to introduce that gas to those containers? It's really important to consider how we do that. Compressed gas or liquids, as they change phase, are very, very cold. We want to make sure that our depopulation is humane, so we don't want to be freezing animals and we don't want to be freezing up our hoses. So we need to be very intentional about how we introduce gas. And then, of course, we need to think about what gases that we're going to use. We can use inert gases, we can use carbon dioxide, we can use combinations of inert gases and carbon dioxide, and I'll talk about that as well. We need to think about how we're going to move our animals when they're alive, and then how we're going to handle the carcasses once the animal is dead. The real focus there is thinking about if I'm going to use a whole building, a whole barn depopulation method, we really need to think about how we're going to handle our carcasses at the end. So, for example, in a swine facility, it really is not a good idea in most, at least modern swine facilities, to depopulate animals in the barn because trying to get those sows or market pigs out of pens and cages is very, very difficult. So for me, if I'm doing a larger method, I like to walk the animals out of the building into the container in which I'm going to gas them, if I'm using an inhalant gas, as opposed to depopulating them in the building. All right, so let's take a brief look at some of the gases that can be used. Again, we can use those inert gases like nitrogen, argon. They are really considered the gold standard from a humane standpoint. By inert gases, what I mean, these are gases that are found in the air that we breathe. They are non-aversive to the animals, so that as the animals start to breathe them, they don't react to that. And it really is the most humane way to depopulate animals is with these inert gases. However, it can be a little bit more difficult because we do need to, in essence, what we're doing is we're removing the oxygen from the environment. So we need to make sure that we have a container that does allow us to sufficiently remove the oxygen as we replace that oxygen with argon or more commonly nitrogen. Okay. So the other thing that we want to talk about is carbon dioxide because it really is a very common method for depopulating large numbers of animals or even small numbers of animals, used quite commonly in poultry, but also in livestock as well. The thing about carbon dioxide that makes it pretty efficient is that it is heavier than air. And because it's heavier than air, it provides that bathtub effect. And what I mean by that is it will settle to the ground. So if I have a building and I can seal up the sides and I have a way to put that carbon dioxide in that building, then I can fill up that building without having to do the same level of sealing that I might if I were going to use an inert gas like nitrogen, because it will ride lower in that area where those animals are moving and not have a tendency to migrate upwards like a gas that's lighter than air would. It is not. It's not accepted everywhere in terms of a humane depopulation method. So that is something we need to think about. And we need to think about the safety of the responders because not only could it depopulate pigs, it also has the potential to cause harm or even death in the responders. So we need to be very careful about that. Not as common, but sometimes we see depopulation using mixes of gases. Oftentimes that's a welding gas because it's commonly available, or beer gas. And by beer gas, what I mean is the gas that is used at the tap to help get the beer out of the keg. So again, not as common, but those are gases that can be used. So let's talk about some of the benefits of carbon dioxide for depopulation. Carbon dioxide does cause very rapid depression and anesthesia. It says in birds here, but also in pigs. Again, it's heavier than air, so we have that bathtub effect. And it isn't going to explode and it isn't going to burn, which is relatively safe. There are significant safety concerns that I'll talk about in the next slide. So we need to think about those, but it isn't going to explode. So that's very useful and helpful. And it's available in a number of different ways. So we can get whole tractor trailers full of compressed gas. We can get liquid gas, and we can also get it in smaller canisters and cylinders and dewars, etc. So it is available in a number of different forms. All right. So how do we implement it? So we need to think about that it's not aversive to animals to about 19%. But as we get above 19%, animals are going to sense that something's wrong. And it says aversive here at 30%, and even in that range between 20 and 30%, those animals are going to react because they sense that something is wrong. Also, carbon dioxide can be cause pain. It can, as it connects with moisture on the animals, it can cause sort of acid buildup in the lungs and around the eyes. So it does have some animal welfare concerns. And for depopulation, we need to get it between that 40 and 60% carbon dioxide. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So we need to make sure that we're very intentional and careful about how we're introducing that gas, because if we open the valves up all the way, we can have a tendency to freeze up our valves and freeze up our hoses as that compressed gas releases from the tanks. And if we're using a liquid carbon dioxide, there's the potential that we might need a vaporizer to help convert that phase from liquid to gas. Really, the biggest challenge, though, is for our workforce. So we, even at low concentration, so 2 to 3%, it can cause, coughing, it can cause headaches, it can cause you to vomit. And at 4%, it can cause people to pass out. And 5%, it can cause death. And the other thing that you see there is that, again, as I mentioned, when you're actually deploying that gas as it comes out of that container, that compressed gas container, or a liquid container, it is very, very cold. So we can cause freezing burns on responders as well. Because of all of these challenges, a large-scale deployment with carbon dioxide requires a significant amount of safety, equipment, and processes to ensure that we're depopulating those animals without causing significant harm to our workforce. Just a couple of pictures real quickly, just to give you an idea. Here's a shipping container that's been modified. Here, you can see more in the center or on the right side as well, is just a pen that's being covered with plastic before the carbon dioxide is being introduced. Again, here's a roll-off that can be used. Next to it is a trash can from the poultry side for avian influenza. For smaller backyard farms, we'll often use a trash can with a container of CO2 that we'll introduce through a small hole in the container. So any sort of way that we can contain that gas can be effective for depopulating the animals. Next, I want to talk about depopulation with foam. That's a newer method as well. A couple of different types of foam. I'm not going to go into all of the details here, but the two types of foam are firefighting foam. So firefighting foam, it is the foam that you see towards the center. It is in sort of the consistency of shaving cream. So it has bubbles, but they're a much smaller bubble. And basically what happens is you cover the animals with that foam. It occludes the trachea, and it causes death through that occlusion. Okay, not considered a very highly humane method. It's not accepted in all parts of the world. It is a method that can be implemented quite easily. I have, a guide that shows you all the equipment that you need and how to implement the method. It is quite simple to do, perhaps as a stopgap measure, why a country is trying to get other tools in place for a more humane method of depopulation. The nitrogen foam depopulation, it is a very different method for depopulating animals. You can see the foam on the right. It looks quite different. Basically, what we have there is a very large light bubble. That bubble is filled with nitrogen. In essence, what we're doing with high expansion nitrogen foam is we are delivering nitrogen gas to those animals by the foam. And what happens then, we build that foam up over top of the animals. As the animals move, they pop the bubbles. Those bubbles then expose those pigs to the nitrogen gas. The bubbles push the oxygen out, and then the layer of foam over top holds that nitrogen gas in there. So in essence, what it does is it allows us to deploy nitrogen gas depopulation without having to have a container. So that's one of the benefits of that method. This is just showing you a system for deploying high expansion nitrogen foam. You can tell here, I think, the size of the bubbles and the light, the fluffiness of the bubbles. And so it can be deployed in a container. It can be deployed in an entire building. Okay, so here again, the death is by anoxia versus occlusion. So we're basically replacing the oxygen with nitrogen. So it can be used for a variety of different species as well. All right, so next I want to shift, and I know that I'm talking very quickly because this is just intended to be an overview, and I want to respect my time. I'm probably going to go over, but I think Dr. Clifford will be kind to me, I hope. But now I want to transition into mortality management and why that's important. So, one of the things that we don't often think about is the fact that these animals that we are disposing of are mainly composed of water, significant amount of water in those animals. Of course, it depends on species and it depends on the age of the animals. But let's just take an example of a 160 kilogram pig. That's going to generate 88 liters of leachate coming from the animal. So 88 liters of water in that animal. Why is that important? Well, it's not the water. We are not as concerned about water, but we are concerned about is what are the constituents that are in that water? Tremendous amounts of a number of chemicals in there. I'm just going to point to one of them. So that's nitrate. So we can have up to 2,000 parts per million of nitrate in common leachate coming from pigs or any animals. Why is that a problem? Because that is going to, one, it can be toxic to humans, but it also can generate surface water, groundwater issues as well with that nitrogen contamination, nitrate contamination. But it's not just the chemicals. In that leachate, we also have microbes, viruses, E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter. We could have the avian influenza virus if we're talking about poultry, or we can have the African swine fever virus as well. And that can be very critical. One example of that recently is from the Philippines. They were challenged with a outbreak of African swine fever. They worked very hard to depopulate the animals, dispose of the animals, and eradicate the disease. They had the disease eradicated in many parts of the country. And then what happened is they had a hurricane and they had disposed of those animals by deep burial. Deep burial is is an environment that does not break down microbes well or viruses well. And when those deep burial pits flooded, it spread virus throughout the regions that had been free of the virus since they went through the eradication program. So, we need to understand that there is virus in those carcasses, so we need to make sure that we manage those carcasses well. Again, depending upon how we're raising the animals, but there could be hormones, there could be antimicrobials in there as well that are going to last into that leachate. All right, so let's talk about methods. I'm not going to talk about the ones that you're most familiar with, such as deep burial, because you already understand those processes are quite common. I'm going to talk about some new methods. So the first one I want to talk about is shallow burial with carbon. This method is basically a hybrid of deep burial that everyone's familiar with and composting. What we're doing is instead of digging a trench that might be 3 or 4 meters in the ground and placing those animals in that deep pit that might be very close to groundwater. And in reality, in many parts of the world that I've worked in, I've seen animals put into pits that already had groundwater in there. So clearly that had the potential for contamination. But here we just have a 60 centimeter trench. Why is that important? It's because that shallow soil zone is very biologically active, and those microorganisms in that biologically active zone are going to work towards breaking down the carcasses and activating the pathogens that are in there. So we dig a 60 centimeter trench. We're going to place 30 centimeters of carbon material at the base of that trench. That carbon is going to do a couple of things. Primarily, it's going to absorb leachate. So it's going to trap that leachate as those animals decompose so that it doesn't migrate down vertically. It's also going to trap oxygen in the pore space between those particles of carbon, and that might be wood chips or rice straw or rice hulls or straw or any other similar high carbon materials. And then finally, they're going to provide elemental carbon for the microbes that they'll use as their food source. The other food that these microorganisms need is going to be nitrogen. They're going to get that nitrogen from the carcasses. Again, I'm showing a Holstein cow here, but could just as easily be a pig if we're responding to African swine fever. We're going to return that 60 centimeters of soil that we took out. We're going to place it over top of the animals to seal those in so that we're not going to have scavenger activity. And then we'll plant some vegetation along the top. All right, it's very easy to implement, rapid, doesn't cost a lot. It keeps the infected material on the farm. So it is a method that has benefits. Mostly, though, those benefits focus around disease transmission and environmental benefits. So we're creating a significantly greater separation from the groundwater table. We're absorbing that leachate, as I mentioned earlier, and the vegetation that we plant on there is going to trap nutrients, stabilize the surface of that trench. Best way to see it is to see it in being implemented. Here we're digging the trench. Here we've placed carbon in the bottom, so 30 centimeters of carbon. We've placed our animal carcasses here, just showing you the difference. Here it's being used for swine. That's being used during an avian influenza outbreak here on the right. We begin covering it with soil, and then at the end we have this. This is what we have. So what I want to point out here, this is at 1 year. So this process is not as rapid as composting, but it also doesn't require management. What we do is we put it in place, we put vegetation on the surface of it, and we leave it for a year. At the end of a year, we can level it out and return it to its previous use. But what I wanted to point out here is this is a very arid part of the country. You can see the vegetation around this area is very sparse and very brown and dry. But over top of the shallow barrow with carbon trench, the vegetation is lush and green. It's because they're taking up the nutrients from those animals, they're taking up the moisture, and they have all of the nutrients and moisture that they need, as opposed to the surrounding landscape, which is very dry and arid. I will just point out there is a temporary fence that they put around this site. That is because this particular part of the country had a significant amount of coyote activity, and so they were concerned that coyotes were going to dig. We did have a trail camera down here at the end, and we didn't have any coyote activity, but that's the reason they put the fence up, is just to make sure that that wasn't going to be a challenge. Done lots of different work, particularly in swine, looking at a number of different pathogens and viruses, specifically related to African swine fever. I did work in Vietnam where we're looking at how quickly we could break down the African swine fever virus with this method. And surprisingly, what we found is that within 7 to 10 days, we're able to inactivate the African swine fever virus because of the biological activity in this method. And we were looking not just in the tissue that has the highest concentration of virus, the spleen tissue, because it is a soft tissue that's going to be exposed and have a potential for decomposing very quickly. But we're also looking at the bone marrow of the femur, because the femur is protected by a significant amount of muscle tissue, but also the marrow is protected by the bone itself. And both in the bone marrow and in the soft tissue, we were able to inactivate the African swine fever virus within 7 to 10 days. So it's that biological activity. Lastly, I want to talk about composting. Composting is a method that we are using significantly for our disease outbreaks in the United States. It's growing in interest in many other parts of the world as well. It is relatively simple. We have only 3 parts. We have a base layer that allows the oxygen to flow into that. That's a carbon material that's got some bigger pore spaces to allow oxygen to flow. In the center of that, we have our animals, manures, and some carbon material. And then we have a cover that insulates it, keeps the heat in and the odors out. Just to see quickly what that looks like, here we've placed our base layer. We're starting to place our animals on top of that windrow. Here we put some carbon on top of that layer of animals. And we're placing another layer of animals on top. And then ultimately, we're going to cover that up and let the microbes in that environment break down those pathogens, so the African swine fever virus. We've also done work with composting in Vietnam, and we are finding that we can inactivate in this environment within around 5 days the African swine fever virus through this composting process. The other thing I wanted to point out is that it is biological activity because we think about temperature being the main component for inactivating viruses. Temperature is really just an indicator of biological activity. What I think is interesting on this work that we did in Lithuania, this was with wild boars, so they were very small piles. So it's not like the big piles I just showed you that had a lot of mass that could maintain heat. Here, what we can see is from the time that we placed these animals in, we had a long time before those piles reached the temperatures that we really look to for inactivating pathogens, which is 55 degrees C. So it was a long time. But we still had biological activity. And what we find here is that even though we didn't have very high temperatures early on, we were still able to inactivate the virus within those carcasses within 15 days. So I think that's important to understand is that if we create a biologically active environment, we can inactivate those pathogens quite quickly. All right, I know that I went over, so I appreciate your patience. I hope we have time for some questions.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor
Thank you
Flori,
very much,
por la
Dr. Flori.
excelente presentación. Yo sé que
Wonderful
esto es un
presentation.
tema
I know,
da
of
para
course,
muchísimo
this
más,
is a topic we could
pero
cover
esto es
in a longer
para que los
time.
países
The idea was
puedan
just to
hacerse
give a
una
brief
idea
overview
de
so
los
countries could be
métodos
aware
que
of different
existen
methods
de
that
despoblación
are
y
available
de
for
eliminación
depopulation
y
and disposal
disposición de cadáveres.
of
Y bueno,
carcasses.
según las capacidades de cada
And of
país
course,
y de
looking
acuerdo
at
a
their
las
own
metodologías ya
capabilities and the
instaladas.
methodologies that they've
Vamos
already
a
installed.
dejar las preguntas. Ya hay
Well,
preguntas,
we do
ya
have
nos
questions
han
already.
empezado a llegar preguntas,
We've received
así
some in
que
the
los
chat box and in
insto
the
para que
Q&A
sigan
box.
haciéndolo.
I encourage you to
Vamos a
continue
darle la
asking your
palabra
questions, but we will give the
al
floor
doctor
now
Clifford.
to
Él
Dr.
nos
Clifford,
va a
who
hablar
will
un
be
poco
talking a
sobre
bit about
la experiencia de
the
Estados Unidos
experience
en
in the
cuanto
USA
a la
uh,
atención de brotes
regarding
con
outbreaks
regionalización o
with
compartimentalización, cómo
regionalization,
han
compartmentalization,
desarrollado estas
and
metodologías para
how
toda la
they've
eliminación
developed these
y manejo de los
methodologies
animales, cadáveres.
for
Entonces,
management and
antes de
disposal
eso,
of animals and
una breve
carcasses.
reseña
So
del
before
doctor
I give the
Clifford.
floor to Dr. Clifford, I just want to
Bueno,
give
el
a
doctor
brief
Clifford
bio.
trabaja
Dr.
actualmente en
Clifford
Mozambique
currently
como
works
asesor
at
comercial
Quick
veterinario,
as
aportando
a
información
veterinary
sobre los peligros
advisor, providing
en el
information
mundo de la
on
sanidad animal,
the
OPSA,
WOA
que afectan a las aves de
chapters
corral
that
y
affect
asesora sobre la
poultry
política
and
del
also
Departamento de
advises
Agricultura de
on
los Estados
policy
Unidos,
for the Department
USDA,
of
y a los venados
Agriculture of the
americanos.
US, USDA,
Antes de
regarding
convertirse en
poultry.
consultor, el doctor
And
Clifford trabajó
before
durante
becoming a
33
consultant, he
años en el
worked
Departamento
during
de Agricultura de
33
los Estados
years
Unidos.
in the Department of
En
Agriculture in
esto
the United States,
desempeñó un papel
where
de
he
liderazgo en la
had
protección de
leadership
la salud
roles
animal en
in
nuestro país
protecting animal
y en la
health
garantía de
and
oportunidades
guaranteing
comerciales internacionales
international
y
commercial
como asesor comercial
opportunities
jefe de
as
servicios
a trade
veterinarios.
advisor, lead
El
trade
doctor
advisor for
Clifford
veterinary
tuvo durante
services.
12 años
Dr.
el
Clifford
cargo de director
was
sanitario jefe en el USDA,
head
Servicios
veterinary director of
Veterinarios
the
en
USDA
Washington,
for
D.C.
12 years
También
in
fue
Washington,
delegado de los
D.C.
Estados Unidos
He's
para
also
la
been a
OPSA
delegate of the
durante
United
12
States
años.
to
El
WOA
doctor
for 12
Clifford
years.
comenzó su carrera
Dr. Clifford
como
began his
veterinariano
career in
privado
Kentucky
en una
as a private
estancia en la
veterinarian
OPSA, obtuvo su
in
título
a,
de doctor en
combined
medicina veterinaria y
office,
maestro en
and he
licenciatura en ciencia
has
zoonótica en la
a
Universidad
licentiate in
de
animal
Kentucky.
sciences at Missouri
Nacido en
University.
Stoughton, doctor
He was
Clifford
born
reside
in
actualmente en
Kentucky and
Bowling Green
currently
con su
lives in
esposa
Bowling
Sara y
Green
su
with
hija.
his wife Sarah.
Así que con
And
esta his sister-in-law. So with all that, Dr. Clifford, you have the floor. Thank you. You can go
Thank
ahead
you,
and share your
Erica.
experience.
Good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks, Gary, for your introduction. And I do apologize to the group that I don't have slides. I was came in a little late on this, and I had other commitments that I had to make, so I wasn't able to prepare those for you. But definitely appreciate the opportunity to share with you our experiences in the United States with high path avian influenza that we're all suffering around the world. Uh, I'm going to start off talking about a little bit about compartments and regionalization or zoning. We refer to it in the U.S. primarily as zoning and compartments. Um, but I think it's important to note why you even have to have or use zones and compartments. And it's basically the process for trade when you're hit with diseases like high path AI, African swine fever, or other transboundary diseases. It's extremely important to have these things in place in order to maintain trade. Because if you don't, what happens oftentimes from other countries is they shut off your entire country from trade. And we've had that happen in the US on a number of occurrences, or at least a huge part of the United States. And so therefore, we've developed a program in many areas and tried to benefit from zoning and regionalizations agreements in accordance with WOA standards. We follow WOA standards for all of these types of issues. The swine industry recently has developed a surveillance program and a program to expand and start zoning agreements with the swine industry prior to any outbreak, and that's when it's best done. It's hard to develop these agreements during an outbreak itself. You're not only busy with the outbreaks, but you have to have a lot of personnel to work with your trading partners, to go with there. There has to be a lot of trust, and there has to be a lot of specificity in the agreement as to what can and cannot do with regards to trade and safe trade. So it's also from a standpoint of the zoning agreements are very important and able to maintain not just trade, but trade in fresh and frozen products as well as day-old and hatching eggs, day-old chicks and hatching eggs. The U.S. has a lot of high-end breeding organizations within the United States and provide about 60% of the world's multiplier breeders in the world for other birds from those. So it's critically important we have zoning agreements in the U.S. So I'm going to start back by giving you a little bit of history as to when and we started actually developing this. It actually happened in the early 1990s due to a low pathogenic avian influenza in the United States that we were very concerned would convert to high path AI. Excuse me, I have a little congestion. Um, in the state of Virginia. Uh, so the United States, for the first time went in and eradicated low path AI, this particular low path AI agent. But after that event was over, and after spending about $140 million in its eradication, the United States, we decided then at that time we needed to develop a extensive surveillance program in the U.S. So in order for you to be able to develop zones and compartments within your country and for trading partners, we feel it's very important that you have a program that you can have active and passive surveillance in order to quickly detect disease and to be able to control and eliminate that disease. And in ability to ensure that you're not going to provide or ship products to another country and spread that disease to that country. Excuse me. So at that point in time, we went to a program that was already established, well established way back in the 40s and 50s in the United States called the National Poultry Improvement Plan. This plan was a state, federal, and industry partnership in the United States, and it's been an excellent program. It was originally established to eliminate Salmonella pylori from the poultry industry. So we asked them to develop standards for both low path and high path AI approaches for surveillance programs, and that's what they did. So in the United States, it's a voluntary program to belong to that, but within that program itself, there's both passive and active surveillance. They, they surveil and go in and take, like they'll take it depending upon the size of the flocks. There'll be 15 to 30 samples per flock, and they'll be combined into a tube, five uh, birds per tube. And then those samples are sent off and tested in various laboratories across the U.S. We have a huge laboratory network in the United States. We have about 40 or 50 labs that assist us, but you're looking at the same volume of birds necessarily at the smaller countries, smaller labs. You can do many of the same things with one or two laboratories, depending upon your bird size population. The other thing that those things are done on a specific schedule, but depending upon the type of flock it is, the length of time the birds live, and so forth. Those things could be provided to you. It's on the website, the USDA website, under the National Poultry Improvement Plan, if you're interested in looking at those. Anyway, so the question is, since it's a voluntary program, how do we get all of our commercial industry to participate? Well, the United States is fortunate, and I know it's difficult in many countries, but in our eradication programs for disease, we pay 100% indemnity of the value of the birds at the time that they're killed or depopulated. We also pay for the disposal, we pay for the depopulation, and we pay for what we refer to now as virus elimination, which is often referred to as um, C&D, cleaning and disinfection. And the reason we talk more about virus elimination, which I think it's important for countries to realize, is when you go into an operation, you don't, many of those operations are older buildings and so forth. And when you talked about previously with cleaning and disinfection, you thought about high pressure spray washes in those facilities, and you would cause a lot of damage in those facilities because of that. And as a result, the United States government was paying for repairing of that damage. Well, we saw as our role is not to make facilities whole again or to make them new. Our role is to eliminate the virus. So in many cases where we're able, you can close up a house like Gary was mentioning about with regards to some of the gases, but you can close up a house and heat it, and you can get it to a temperature, and I can't remember the exact temperature, but there's a certain temperature for a certain number of days. And any virus in that particular house will die, especially high path AI virus, because it's very susceptible to heat. So the temperature may vary depending upon the type of disease, and I'm sure it would, and the viability of that particular virus to heat. So basically, since we do this, we tell the commercial industry, if you want to have 100% indemnity and all of that benefit, you have to belong to the MPIP program. And if you elect not to belong to the MPIP program, you only get 25% indemnity. So therefore, we have 100% of our breeding industry, our commercial industry is part of the MPIP program. And so they are regularly have surveillance, and every single flock in the United States that in that commercial sector are tested prior to slaughter. We have one of the best surveillance systems in the world. And I'm not saying it's the only one, but I'm saying it's one of the best. But I also know it's very expensive. So in other countries, you have to take those things into consideration in developing your plan, and other people such as Gary or others can help you in that development if you're looking at something and doing something in your country at a level that's reliable and that your trading partners can trust. So after that occurred, we started developing a few zoning agreements. We based a zone on 10 kilometers. So if you have an infected flock, we put a 10-kilometer zone around that infection, and we ask our trading partners to accept everything in our country except for that 10 kilometers. That's the first level that we would prefer. Now, we've got countries that accept that level, but we've got some that want a little more protection in their mind than the 10 kilometers. So the next level we go to is a county level in the United States, which is a political boundary. As you know, you probably have counties or other, you might call them other districts or areas within your own country. Those vary across the United States. In some cases, counties can be huge and they can be very small. But we go to a county level. And a lot of our agreements are at the county level. Some of them are at a state level. So that's the next level we go to. And the state level we don't like because obviously it's a huge amount of territory in the U.S. in most all of our states. So we try to minimize that with our trading partners, but there are some that still have it at a state level. So that kind of lays that out. So prior to 2014, I was still the Chief Veterinary Officer of the United States. I was still over the Veterinary Services Division. And for the first time, we had the H5 that now the whole world suffers from cross the Bering Strait into North America. And for the first time, we had a huge high path AI outbreak in Minnesota and Iowa, largely due to lateral spread at that point in time because biosecurity wasn't adequate. So we had to beef up our biosecurity, and today our biosecurity is much, much, much improved in the United States as a result of that. But basically, because of that outbreak, as a CVO, I said we've got to expand our zoning agreements, and I send out 4 teams. One of those was myself across the entire world to our major trading partners. And by the end of the outbreak, we had 14 zoning agreements with 14 countries. Today, the United States, when in that effort and continue that effort, and they have 80 countries with 184 zoning agreements. So it's a huge amount, and it's allowed the United States through these things, while there's been losses due to high path AI, we have been able to maintain $5.4 billion a year in trade. So I realize it's a different level between different countries and so forth, and the amount of resources you have, but you can still often apply those things to smaller countries with smaller number of resources uh, within your own country. So anyway, in addition, so I'm going to talk a little bit, that's how we do zoning. So in compartments, we look at compartments as something that really is only utilized in the United States for high-end breeders. So I'm talking about like parent and grandparent stock in the United States. And the reason for that, when we look at the international standards compartmentalization, and the fact that you're asking countries, if you have a huge outbreak, you want to still maintain trade in those compartments. You're looking at facilities, a company that's going to have multiple facilities in multiple states in the US. And for them to have protection from disease when it could be all around them, or, you know, it could even be a neighbor. You've got to have a level of biosecurity that goes way beyond what is normally affordable with the regular commercial sector. And so therefore, we've developed our biosecurity standards in the US for those facilities. We've had 2 companies that are now considered compartments in the United States. But I can tell you, it wasn't without them spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to reach that level of compartmentalization. So I think from a standpoint of the US, I know in the UK they have compartments. The European Union is developing some, or the beginning to. I think the UK follows kind of the US standard, so does Canada. I think Australia and New Zealand as well. Compartmentalization really, in my opinion, and I don't speak on behalf of WOA and don't try to, is something that has to be more reserved for animals and those products that are really very expensive and high-end breeding animals. So with that, that's all I have for you today. And Erica, I'll turn it back to you.
Muchísimas gracias,
Thank you
Dr. Cliff,
so
por
much, Dr.
toda
Clifford,
la
for
experiencia
sharing all your experience
resumida, porque
and
yo sé que
summarizing it,
mucha
because I know
gente
that
podría hacer una
you
larga
could also
conversación que pudiéramos
be
tener con
speaking for
usted en
days
cuanto a toda la
about all
experiencia
your
que han tenido en
experience
Estados Unidos,
and everything
desde
that the
ser
United States
miembros
has
de Influenza
done
Aviar.
with the
Em,
avian influenza
Dr.
outbreaks and the
Clifford,
like.
antes de que nos deje,
Before
nos
you leave us,
gustaría
Dr. Clifford, we'd like
que
to
nos comentara en
ask you
cuanto
to
a
tell us
manejo y disposición de
about
cadáveres
disposal and management
ya
of
sea en su
carcasses.
experiencia en una
In your experience,
compartimentalización
whether it is with
o
compartments
en
or
una regionalización,
whether it is with
¿cómo, qué
zoning,
experiencia tuvieron ustedes?
what
¿Cómo lo
types of
manejaron?
experience have you had?
Especialmente
How have you handled
animales tal
that
vez
part, especially
de matadero
for
que se encontraron
animals that
positivos.
come from the
¿Cómo
slaughter and that
manejaron
have been
ese
found
especialmente?
positive? How did you handle that?
So in the United States, uh, we use, as Gary had indicated, we use a lot of composting for like turkeys or if a broiler operation, and we try to do that, compost them actually in their own house. And then that material, once the virus has been killed in that, then that material can be spread on farmland and others for as any other composting material could. So oftentimes, though, we have very large facilities or other facilities that cannot compost inside. We compost also outside. We use burial, as Gary said, but burial oftentimes in the U.S. is very difficult. If we can't do any of those things, we used lined landfills that have lining in them that don't allow leaching into the groundwater and things like that. And so, how do we move that product? We have huge, what we call bio bags that go on the back of like tractor trailer trucks, large trucks. These are bags that can be totally contained. So that truck is totally disinfected. And they put these bio bags in, and then as they depopulate birds, they put all the birds into these large bio bags. They are closed up. The truck is totally disinfected again, and then they're hauled to these lined landfills. Now, in some cases, we we would have liked to have used rendering. The difficulty with rendering, though, is if you use a renderer, you have to shut down that renderer's business to all other things. You can only use that renderer for contaminated product. And we don't have renderers in the US, or at least have not, that typically want us to shut them down and only take that type of product over through that outbreak. So that's not something that we do in the US. So we try, though, our best to keep everything on farm first. We don't like to haul things around, you know. In addition, just for interest's sake, the United States spends, on average, because of this ongoing effect of infection every year, on average, we spend $450 million a year for indemnity, disposal, depopulation, and virus elimination, on average. So this disease is very costly disease, and we are depopulating somewhere in the neighborhood of about 60 million birds a year, and a lot of those are layers because of the large size of layers. One of the things I don't think Gary mentioned, and one of the things we use there for depopulation, and it's not popular, it's not accepted worldwide, but as an animal welfare. But when you're talking about 5 million layers in the United States in one site, on occasion, we try not to use it if we can. We use what we refer to as ventilation shutdown plus heat. So we close the house up and add heat. We don't like to do that, but otherwise, it takes literally multiple people and teams a huge amount of time to do that depopulation. And while you're doing that depopulation, you're allowing the virus to continue to spread in houses. The birds are continuing to die from the virus itself. So it's trying, and you've got more virus in the environment now that, with the potential to spread laterally. So we want to, in the US, we want all birds killed as quickly as can, and we identify that as 24 to 48 hours. We do not like birds to be alive after finding a high path AI any longer than 48 hours.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor Clifford. Por acá tenemos una pregunta más.
Thank you, Dr. Clifford. We have another question here. From Trinidad and Tobago, we have a question. What different categories of zones are utilized by the U.S. for the HPAI free declaration?
So we're zoning out the disease. We don't use a zone that we say is free. We're saying the country is free except for the zones of infection. And let me clarify one thing too. So the $450 million, that's on a yearly basis, not one time. That's annual. So, so I want to make sure everybody understands. We define the infection zone, not the free zone. And the infection zone is what we prevent those products from going anywhere into our international partners. We don't allow any product from those zones to go to international partners. Now, once that zone's released, then depending on the partner on how soon you can start shipping out of that zone.
Doctor Clifford, y una última
Dr. Clifford,
pregunta.
one last question
Pregunta el doctor Ed Arza.
from Ed Arsa. Could you clarify what you means by we pay 100% indemnification? Who pays for that?
Okay, so my buddy Ed Arza. Thank you, Ed. Anyway, Ed and I are good friends. So we pay the value of the bird or product at the time of death. So if you've got a day-old chick, it has one value. If you've got a bird that's getting ready to go to slaughter, it has another value, and everything in between. And so the USDA, we have economists that develop a table for what type of payment we'll have for the type of bird, what age they are. There's payments for eggs, that type of thing as well. So that's across the board. Now, if we hit a high-end breeding operation, those birds can be extremely expensive. And what we do there, obviously, we don't put a dollar amount on them. We have to depend upon the company to provide us data that shows their value and their worth. And then we, based upon support of that information and data that they have, then we pay based upon that.
Doctor Clifford, ahora sí la
Dr.
última.
Clifford, last question. I tell the participants if there are more questions, we will send those to you later.
Okay.
But from Dr. Kenia Gonzalez, she is asking, how much time did it take to recognize the free compartments you mentioned? And are these recognized nationally and by other countries also?
So let me try to explain this in a way hopefully everybody can understand. So before the outbreak, the entire country is free. Okay? You have freedom of the disease. When you identify infection, we go in and put a 10-kilometer circle around that infection. So every time you have an outbreak, there's a new 10 kilometers. So during that period of time that you're putting that 10 kilometers around infection, you'll have some that become free, those 10 kilometers that no longer have disease and they're released from quarantine. And you'll have others that are coming on continually. But where you don't have infection in our country still remains free. And we can guarantee that because of our surveillance program. So all of our trading partners recognize all the rest of our country free where we don't have infection. But they will zone out the infection based either on 10 kilometers, like we first said, or they may want us to restrict a county level for trade to that country, or they may want us to restrict at a state level. So if they put a state level restriction, the whole state is restricted from sending products, day-old chicks, hatching eggs from that state to that country. For those from a county level, we restrict the product from the county to go to that country. And from the 10 kilometer, it would be only the 10 kilometer. The rest of the country that is not into those zones are free and they can ship to those countries. Is that more clear? I hope.
Totalmente, inclusive
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, you have already answered a few other questions that were up here. So thank you very much, Dr. Clifford, for your time and for the excellent presentation and sharing your experience from what you have lived with avian influenza in the United States. Thank you very much. And if there are any other questions, I will send those to you later.
All right, and thank you very much. And I thank you to everybody there. I wish I could be there with you, but I also deal with this stuff every day today in my work with USAPEAK. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Gary.
Bueno,
Okay.
vamos a seguir con
Now let us continue with our webinar. The next presentation, for those of you that are joining us now, I am Erika Calderon. We are at this webinar that deals with depopulation and disposal of all animals. And now let us move to the presentation by Dr. Sergio Duffy, an animal health specialist at WOA, and additionally will talk to us also about this subject matter of regionalization or compartmentalization and all the international regulations. But before I offer the floor to Dr. Duffy, about him, well, Dr. Duffy is a veterinary doctor, graduated from the School of Veterinary Science from the University of Buenos Aires. He took postgraduate studies in veterinary with a master's in science and PhD at the University of Minnesota, USA. Additionally, he has been a teacher in the area of veterinary and veterinary sciences at the universities of Argentina and other countries, as well as internationally, has participated in activities of the World Animal Health Organization, World Organization for Animal Health, and member of the ad hoc group for the assessment of status on foot and mouth disease in countries. He is currently a private consultant in animal health and technical senior advisor at the Animal Health Center and Food Security at the University of Minnesota, and the collaborating center of WOA for training of veterinary services. And with this experience, Dr. Duffy has the floor is yours for you to share your presentation and continue. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate at this seminar. I will cover the second subject matter, compartmentalization and international regulations. And if we talk about standards and rules, the World Organization of Animal Health, WOA, is the reference entity for this. Just a minute, let me work on this. Okay. The WOA regulations are contained in these two publications, the Sanitary Code for Terrestrial Animals and the Manual for Diagnostic Testing and Vaccines for Terrestrial Animals. In the case of the code, it is structured in two volumes. The first volume contains the user guide, which I strongly recommend you read it because there's so much information that you will find useful. There's a glossary also with a definition of some terms that are used within the code itself. And within the code, the interpretation that must be given is that which appears in the glossary. Beware. And lastly, there is a chapter of general considerations, horizontal considerations, where the provisions in those chapters apply to diseases in general, not just any specific disease. And volume 2 contains recommendations that apply to diseases in the WOA list and other diseases considered of importance for international trade. And these chapters, these are specific per disease. Oh, just a minute, please, here. Okay, this is the definition of compartment according to the current terrestrial code. We are not going to read it word by word. That is your work here. But within the code, there are specific articles and sections, chapters on compartmentalization, Chapter 4.4, Zoning and Compartmentalization, which is currently under thorough review. Very likely a new chapter will be developed. So, keep an eye on the changes that may arise in the near future for these concepts of zoning and compartmentalization. And the other chapter is Chapter 4.5, which is the application of compartmentalization. When we talk about compartmentalization, we must also remember the specific disease for which we want to establish a compartment. In the case of African swine fever, just to give you an example, the specific chapter would be 15.1. Why? Because the specific chapters for diseases also contain provisions on how what the compartment should be like for that specific disease. Additionally, aside from these chapters, there are many other chapters that are relevant for compartmentalization purposes, which we will not talk about in detail. But here you can see a list of the main ones. And read and try to interpret each of these chapters is not only long, but also tedious. So what I will try to do instead is summarize or try to summarize the main concepts of compartmentalization and their requirements for a country in the area of animal health. Relate and its connection to diseases. The utmost objective is to obtain and maintain the free status of a country in a given disease for a given disease throughout the whole country. That is very difficult for many countries, either because they are geographically huge or they have neighboring countries that have the infectious status, and it's complicated to apply this to the whole country for different reasons. So we can have partial objectives here. Gain and maintain the free status of a disease, but in a given an animal subpopulation. When we talk about subpopulation, the term is defined in the code's glossary, and it is a specific fraction of an animal population which is identifiable for its specific zoosanitary characteristics or features, either due to the zootechnical characteristics. A subpopulation could be swine or bovines, and different sanitary status. A subpopulation could be free of a disease, and another one could be infected, another one could be free with vaccination or free without vaccination, etc. Within the WOA framework, there are two major ways of defining a subpopulation. One is through zoning. Let me clarify something right now. We just talked about zoning, and according to the rules established by WOA. So in this case, zoning is essentially defined based on geographic criteria. It is a geographic zone. So that geographic zone is defined by the official veterinary service. And in the event the country considers it has met all the requirements of WOA to have that zone officially recognized as free, well, then it can be presented to WOA and be recognized as officially free of a disease. Later on, I will have a bit more words about this. And the other alternative is to define an animal subpopulation, but based on the management and exploitation methods related to biosafety. In this case, the official veterinary service of the country will recognize that compartment, but it is not WOA that will assign the official status to that compartment. As Dr. Clifford already mentioned, this is done through bilateral agreements between countries. Regardless of the fact that zoning has mainly geographic criteria and compartmentalization is basically related to biosafety, both aspects are very important, both for zoning as well as for compartmentalization. And let me share this image. When we want to establish a free zone, it will always be done within a country or an infected zone, like this case. The official sector is the one that defines the zone, and they submit all their paperwork to WOA, and WOA is the one that officially recognizes the free zone, provided that disease is one of the 7 diseases that WOA officially recognizes as free. And to clarify, both African swine fever as well as avian influenza are not part of the WOA diseases, the ones that WOA defines as or recognizes as free. But that does not mean to say countries cannot establish or determine zones, like Dr. Clifford mentioned, with different criteria, and then negotiate bilaterally with other countries so that those countries accept the zoning criteria that that first country has established. Now, as to compartmentalization, theoretically, this can apply to infected countries or free countries. It is advisable to establish this in free countries when there is no disease present, and the compartment will include a series of components that could be, for example, a food producing center, a farm, a swine farm, or a cool refrigeration area, but all of this has to be handled with a common biosafety pattern to guarantee the free status of that compartment in the event something happens. Now, what happens in a free zone? Well, clarification first. The compartment is managed by the private sector, not the official sector or the public sector. And supervision of that compartment is the responsibility of the official sector, both in zoning as well as in compartmentalization. Biosafety measures are mandatory. In the zone, biosafety measures are much harder to enforce because the zone is much broader and includes establishments of different types of production. There could be limits in the free zone that could be very difficult to control. And biosafety measures, on the other hand, at the compartment level are much more stringent and much more controlled. If there's an outbreak in a free zone, the status of that zone is immediately stopped, and it must work following the whole WOA process to recover its status, either through bilateral agreements or whatever other method in the country. In the case of a compartment, if there is an outbreak wherever, or there is a source there, for example, the compartment would not be affected, although we will see this in greater detail in a minute. What are the prerequisites to determine a compartment? Public-private partnership here that must be sound and streamlined based on trust and transparency between these two sectors. Now, what are the criteria to establish a swine compartment, for example? So what I will talk about right now are general concepts to establish a compartment, period. First, what are the principles to define a compartment? First of all, identify and describe all the components therein, all the farms that will be part of it, the feed source, and this must be describing not only each of the components, but the connection between all these components also. So there are four fundamental things when we are going to define a compartment. First is, for what disease will we define or establish a compartment? Secondly, define the animal subcomponent for that department. Thirdly, define which are the components of that compartment. And fourthly, what are the functional relationships or connections between these components? The second aspect is how that compartment will be separated from the potential sources of infection. This requires a description of the physical factors, the barriers, what have you, or spatial factors, the distribution of the farms around the compartment, if there are none, how far away they are, what the status of those farms are, if the farm is surrounded, for example, by crops or forests that could be natural barriers to the pathogens, and the infrastructure, describe the different infrastructure related to lodging, to storage of animals and storage of feed and medication and equipment, etc., etc. And at the core of all of this is the biosafety program. The biosafety program must be based, firstly, on knowing the potential means of introduction of a virus through a very specific analysis. Secondly, to identify the critical control points to prevent the entry of that pathogen. The third would be what biosafety measures will be applied to avoid the entry of that pathogen. And lastly, define or describe the standard operating procedures that will be used to apply the biosafety measures and to control those biosafety measures. Surveillance of the agent of interest. We have two things here. Internal surveillance within the compartment. That is the responsibility of the private sector in this case. And the external surveillance. Internal will show that, yes, the compartment is free. But external surveillance that will be in the hands of the official sector must prove that outside the compartment that everything is free. And in the case that there is an event, well then, the official sector must take measures to respond and reduce the risk of that event to become a bigger issue for the compartment due to the entry of a pathogen. And it is not just a matter of saying we have a biosafety program in force. No, everything must be written in a plan, a program. And the compartment also must keep all documents related to critical factors such as all the biosafety procedures, the surveillance procedures, the traceability procedures. These are the three most important, in fact. So if someone is going to inspect the compartment, the compartment manager must be able to show all the biosafety, surveillance, and traceability procedures that have been used over in the recent periods to comply with the conditions for that compartment. It is necessary to describe the capacities and diagnostic procedures available, usually in the official sector. This is not done by the compartment manager, but instead the official veterinary service to show the plan to respond to an emergency and notify the counterparts and the WOA and other international organizations should there be any need to notify them. And supervision. The control of the compartment contains two aspects. Daily activities is responsibility of the private sector. The official sector, they must supervise and control that the private manager is in compliance with that daily supervision and control. So, to see this,
all right, so biosecurity, I think most of you know about this. There's many definitions. This is just one more. But when talking about biosecurity, we have three basic concepts: bio-exclusion, so avoiding entry; biocontention, avoiding the virus escaping; and biomanagement, avoiding the spread within. So this picture shows us a farm, but if we're talking about compartments, we don't want it to enter a compartment. And if there's one problem in a component of the compartment, it should not be spread to other components in the compartment. And of course, not leaving the compartment. So if we look at it graphically, this is a simplified example of a compartment with a genetics provider. You have the breeding farm and only two broiler farms in this case, provider, feed, and a refrigeration compartment. So what's the idea with this compartment? We want to establish a preventive measure to guarantee the zoosanitary status of the subpopulation of animals within the compartment, and to avoid restrictions to trade in animals and products, animal origin products that come from the compartment. As we've said, if we want to ensure with biosecurity that this remains free of disease, then the first thing to do, well, first, sorry, we have to describe the components and look at the functional relationships. Many times it's just one way, but some cases there's two-way relations. To establish the biosecurity measures, we have to analyze the different potential ways the pathogen could enter the compartment, so risk assessments. And we have some examples here. So once we've identified these ways, we have to find the critical points that can help us control and avoid the virus entering through one of these pathways. Then we define the biosecurity measures to be taken. And fourth, describing the standardized operational procedures to reduce risks. The compartment itself is not the main goal. It's an instrument. And this instrument will help us achieve safe products in terms of their sanitary status. Of course, they have to be safe from other standpoints, but specifically the compartment wants to ensure safety regarding this specific disease or diseases we're dealing with. Having safe products already provides great value for consumers and the industry as a whole. But having safe products is another good way to ensure we maintain trade continuity. And again, here we have trade continuity at national level, which is determined by the official veterinary authority of the country. If they're convinced that the compartment does not pose any risks in terms of spreading the disease because it's free from it and because of the big safety and security measures, it can maintain movement of these animals in the compartment. The other is maintaining trade internationally. When you have an episode outside the compartment, bilateral agreements generally establish that the exporting country will automatically suspend its shipment of animals or products from that compartment, at least temporarily, to the importer country, until whatever is established in the bilateral agreement protocol. With that, the exporting country has to prove the importing country that the compartment has remained safe and free from the disease in spite of the event that may be occurring outside the compartment, and that they have taken the necessary measures to ensure safety within the compartment. We've also talked about this being joint work involving the private and the public sector. But of course, there's roles and responsibilities they each have. For the private sector, they have to develop an effective relationship with the official veterinary services. And they also have the responsibility of developing, implementing, and monitoring their biosecurity plan. This does not mean that the private sector will do all this alone. The best would be to do it jointly with the official sector, but the private sector is responsible for this. To record and control movement of all animals entering and leaving, to implement surveillance, to execute surveillance, and this means either clinical surveillance, zoonotic, or other types of surveillance, and whoever will execute this surveillance is the private sector. Registering, storing, and having all the necessary documentation available. We've mentioned this documentation before, biosecurity measures, traceability, and surveillance, among others. This all has to be available at all times. And they should be able to notify on time and in the correct way any events related to the disease of interest or any other relevant diseases. The official sector must provide clear guidelines with technical foundations on the practices and processes to be applied by the private sector to establish or request the establishment of a compartment and for this to be approved. There has to be an appropriate legal framework to substantiate that compartment. And here the official sector is responsible for surveillance. Surveillance is executed by the private sector, but those responsible for it are the official sector, responsible to the counterparts and international organizations. They have the role and responsibility of approving and supervising compartments. And the official sector is definitely responsible for certifying the condition of free of disease for the swine and the products coming from the compartment. And if they should also promote bilateral cooperation. By this, I mean that the compartment is not acknowledged as free by WOA. These are bilateral agreements, and these have to be managed, including the official and private sector, along with the countries you want to accept the compartments. When you have established compartments, though, that will have effects. These are seen in terms of absence of disease, because you're protecting the status of the subpopulation within the compartment, but also from other diseases. So this means there's less loss in production linked to diseases, and there's less costs related to treatment. It improves animal well-being and helps preserve the environment, and it also, in some cases, could facilitate access to international markets. If an outbreak occurs in the area, the compartment protects the status of that subpopulation within the compartment, and it facilitates and accelerates international trade, keeping up and going forward, and it maintains continuity of national trade, minimizing sanitary and economic consequences of the event. Now, this slide I will show, I took it from Álvaro Pereira's presentation from Uruguay's Beef Institute during a workshop last month. I think it helps us quite a lot. If you talk about being part of an international market, these are the 4 levels you can have. One is the technical and sanitary access, which depends on certifiers and the sanitary authorities and health authorities. And then there's other levels that go beyond the sanitary authorities. When talking about compartments, we are only talking about facilitating sanitary access. Sometimes within the compartment, you also have refrigeration. Then you could also have some help in terms of technical access. I think Dr. Clifford has mentioned this already. It's complicated to have a compartment. There's a big investment involved, so it's good to, before deciding on creating a compartment, it's good to talk to the country you potentially want to accept your compartment to see whether it's truly feasible and how strict they would be in that sense. After that, you could consider whether or not you do have that agreement. It's much more appropriate for all productive systems or integrated production systems, such as pork and poultry, but not so much for those where production is not as integrated. But in any case, it tends to be limited to only certain components of these production systems. Therefore, I think that each country should look at their own situation, carefully analyzing whether it is worth to establish compartments, and especially looking at the WOA's standards, which again are being revised at this point. Thank you very much. And just to show you basic literature here, some references on compartmentalization. They're all available in English and Spanish. And for those who are not familiarized with biosecurity, these are three good sources to have at least an introduction to biosecurity plans. Thank you very much, and I close with that. Thank you very much, Dr. Duffy. Wonderful presentation. I think that gives us a good overview as to compartments and the use of the compartments. We will wait for questions at the end, so thank you very much. Before this, I'd like to remind you that we are also asking you to fill out a survey. It's been sent to the chat box. We appreciate it if you could fill it out. It's really important for our group to have the feedback and information from you. We would like to know how impactful these webinars have been, how useful. So hopefully you'll be able to help us out with that. And we're also adding to the chat box the link so that you can enter the platform where you will find all these webinars. We've had webinars for 3 years now. You'll find all the presentations. Even today's presentations will be uploaded there because I've been asked. So you can then go to the platform and even if share this information with others to train other people. Without anything further, oh, sorry, one more thing. Those who can, please go ahead and add to the chat box what institutions you joined from to have that record as well for this event in particular. And without anything further, Dr. Ureña, we're ready for you. This is our next presentation. We will be hearing about the experience in Dominican Republic as to the disposal of carcasses during the emergency of African swine fever they're dealing with at this point. We will also have some thoughts from Alonso Estefani at OIRSA. But before that, I'll give you the bio of Dr. Ramon Ureña Peralta. He is in charge of swine disease in the Haga, Dominican Republic. He is leading the classic swine fever program in charge of Gran Santo Domingo area for livestock surveillance. He's also a veterinarian of the Autonomous University of Santo Domingo with a specialization in general pathology by Universidad Central del Este. With that, Dr. Ureña, I will share your presentation and you let me know when I switch slides. Thank you. One second to be sure that it is in presentation view.
Déjeme ver. Esta presentación. Vamos a ver. Aquí está. Listo. Adelante.
All right, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. To Erika Calderón and Ica, thank you. We will be sharing our experiences dealing with this terrible disease. I think no country can be ready for this type of disease. It's not the same to read about it than to really see it on the field. Well, in Dominican Republic, we were free of the ASF until 2021. Everyone knows now that we were infected in 1978, and then up to 1983, we managed to eradicate the disease. So that was 40 years without the disease. And since 1997, we are dealing with classic swine fever, but it was under control with vaccination and a good immunization system for backyard farming and for larger facilities. This led to almost having a kind of zoning of a large part of the country without CSF. But in July 2021, ASF entered the country and all the CSF work really went down the drain as well. Next slide, please. When we were first notified in July 2021 about the outbreak, we deployed all our resources. All our veterinary services were paralyzed in the country because everyone had to go out and see how much we had been affected by this disease. So we had veterinarians that worked with poultry, but also with bovine, everyone, plus those working with swine, just to come and see exactly what we were dealing with, at what level it was. One of the first things we did was also stopping livestock mobilization where there were positive samples. We had epidemiological surveillance, slaughter, and disinfection. Because from 78 to 83, we had been positive with ASF. Those who had worked with the outbreak were few, at least very few were working still in the official sector. So it was really hard because most of our veterinarians and our staff didn't really have enough practice. They had never dealt with ASF and they just really didn't know exactly how to manage it. So there was acceptable management of carcasses, but it wasn't really the best way because again there was no clear understanding as to what or how to deal with this. It was a big challenge. We tried to follow the parameters of the things that we could with those that had been present in the prior ASF cases. There was inadequate manipulation, we have to say, of the carcasses. The spread of the disease was so fast that at times we could not really get to all the sites. Sometimes our veterinarians didn't even have the proper protection. Or they didn't really know how to do even the most basic disinfection in dealing with a virus like this one. So there was also incorrect mobilization of animals. without knowing whether they were truly infected or not. And of course, that led to consequences. The disease spread to the whole country. So by mid-August, all 32 provinces had cases of ASF. Something else that was failing is that there was no adequate protocol. Our protocol had some weaknesses that led to confusion because then the veterinarians had, even though they had a certain foundation, they again didn't know exactly how to act with this specific disease, only what they had learned from university about it. Something else that really damaged us is that there was insufficient disinfection. Some of the disinfection processes were not fully carried out, at least not following recommendations. Some steps were not done, and so that meant that the virus could have jumped from one community to the next, even with the disinfection process, because there was a certain elimination of some animals that were positive with ASF, but there was no quarantine of the whole place, and there was no proper disinfection of the whole facility or the whole area, and again, even of the carcasses. So we had no real certainty. We didn't know how to bury them. We didn't know how deep, or even how to dispose of carcasses properly. So overall, it was a mismanagement of the disease. At that point, another deficiency was that we had no clear method to eliminate or depopulate positive animals. The only thing we had available was this insecticide, carbamide, to dilute it in water and apply it to the animals so that in less than 40, 50 minutes, they would die. But of course, it was not the best way. And every regional office had a different method to dispose of the carcasses. Because again, we had no standardized protocol for the whole country. So each region, each regional office did whatever they could at that point to see if they could find a way to stop it as fast as possible. But of course, that had consequences. Many people uh, did not have the right approvals, and so they started moving pigs around because they were not aware of how this would or the impacts it would have. So they would rather send whatever they could to market to avoid losing more. Um, so this there's a lot of breeding that's backyard farms, and there's a cultural issue there. So the whole country does have this kind of backyard farms, even border areas. So it was difficult to control the outbreak because there was no standardized breeding or farming. In backyard farms, for example, 80% of the feed comes from the household's own waste. So that was very harmful in our case. There was no proper diagnosis even, and we could not really know exactly what animals were positive with the disease. With the support, and this is where we started organizing ourselves. After, I think it was 4 months that we looked to institutional support. In this case, OIRSA provided technical assistance at all levels, really. There was a technician that was facilitated by OIRSA, and so with them we could create the cleaning and disinfection protocols, dealing with slaughter, transport or mobilization, we developed several protocols for carcass disposal, etc. So all these protocols were standardized for the whole country. And thanks to that, starting at that point, we had written instruments that were proper to help us deal with this disease epidemiologically. So each regional office received all the documents and they were all standardized. So if in the northern region they knew what the eastern region was doing, then the southern did as well, and everyone was doing the same, and that helped us a lot. So we started using the acceptable methods at this point for euthanasia. The first one was the captive bolt method. This procedure is fast, but it did have a disadvantage. There was a lot of blood and just different flows that could lead to spreading of the disease through other factors. And it took a long time to remove all or to eliminate, sorry, all the pigs. When we had to kill off 200 with the gun, it took one whole day, even 2 days to do this. Afterwards, we looked at another method, electrocution, with a plant, with a power plant, and so we started doing it that way. This method was much faster, and we could easily, in one day, eliminate a population of 600 to 700 animals. So it was faster, and we could close off a source of disease in less than 12 hours with elimination and cleaning to fully close that source. And also, there we started to use the proper methods for carcass disposal, following WOA standards. And this always with the help of, we said, technicians came to train us to open a trench. And we also had a course on cleaning and disinfection and disposal of carcasses with all the necessary measures. And this was from the most basic to most advanced option. So first, just the outlining of a specific zone or area. With that, then you would dig the trench according to the number of animals. It would be deeper. And then we used it to bury the animals. Each brigade needed to ensure they had all their equipment. No people were allowed if they were not part of the specific brigade. You would only have those that worked on that specific emergency entering the area. We also corrected the fact of lining the excavation site to avoid the virus from contaminating the groundwater. So we would select proper areas to ensure the carcasses could be disposed of. And each of these areas had the place at where the trenches were dug as close to the source of the outbreak. So again, to avoid mobilizing animals, and always with the strict protocol of protective equipment. No one could be without their PPE. So that's overalls, gloves, covering their faces, the lining on the burial sites, PVC pipes and others to avoid any issues, so an explosion, so that methane gas would not lead to any type of issues and the trench collapsing.
The thing is, it was about, well, the depth depends on the number of animals. To the right-hand side, this is the way we used to do it before. And to the left, you can see how we are doing it now, trying to minimize as much as possible any risk of contaminating other farms. Because, well, in the Dominican Republic, all large farms basically have groundwater, the same groundwater. They were using this groundwater to clean up the farm. Disposal takes about 6 to 8 months. There's epidemiological study, perhaps, of where the origin of the virus, and we proceed to dispose of these animals as close as possible to this ditch here. The animals are taken from wherever they were in confinement and they are disposed of here. We try to respect animal well-being so that the animals suffer as least as possible. This is a disease that unfortunately has no vaccination at the time, and the only measure we can use for biosafety is the only tool we have available is biosafety, and biosafety. Because right now this is under control. The disease is under control. There are parts of the country that have gone for 8 months now without reporting cases, with active surveillance and passive surveillance reporting, both at slaughterhouses as well as on the farms. Any swine that dies for one reason or another, no animals can be sold until the laboratory provides the result. If we have a clinical suspicion, the first thing we put in quarantine is the site, the zone, preventing any movement. When military staff is there, preventing the exit of animals, of products, byproducts, and subproducts. So that farm is under control of the Ministry of Livestock until the final result comes. And if it is positive, well, we set up a camp to eliminate all the production. The whole place and the staff itself are cleaned. Until we do not disinfect and clean, nothing can happen on the farm. If the results are negative, well then we at least apply a precautionary quarantine, monitoring the farm, because that also depends on the conditions in the surroundings. If we see activity in the surroundings, well, then we know that the whole area may be affected by African swine fever. Next, please. Last. Well, thank you very much. This is the experience of how we have handled African swine fever to date. Thank you very much, Dr. Ureña, for your excellent presentation, for sharing with us your experience, how you are addressing this in the Dominican Republic. We certainly hope that in the near future, this can be controlled and finally eliminated once and for all. Now we will call on Dr. Alonso Estefani, who will share the experiences of OIRSA, as Dr. Ureña was talking about. But a brief bio of Dr. Alonso Estefani. He's a veterinary doctor, currently an animal health officer at OIRSA in the Dominican Republic, and provides support to the veterinary services in the control and eradication of African swine fever program ever since the emergency started. Is Alonso here with us? Oh, yes, here I am. Can you hear me?
Sí,
Yes.
adelante.
Yes, go ahead. Thank you, Erica. And I apologize in advance. There is no way I can activate my camera. But if you hear me, I think that should be good enough. I would like to first of all thank you, Eric, and all the ICA team for the opportunity given to us as OITSA and as a country to share with countries of the region the experiences in all of this, because the truth is we are very satisfied to be able to support other countries in their gradual preparedness to any type of emergency, not only African swine fever, but any other transboundary disease that may affect any other country. Now, with that experience that Dr. Ureña just shared, we really do not have a formal presentation because, well, he gave you a general overview of the entire country, obviously including what we have been doing uh, from OITSA's stance. As was said, we have been working together over the years, learning from these experiences, not only with OITSA, but also with other international agencies that are working in the Dominican Republic and the region with diseases like this. I just wanted to specify two things. First, although the country at the beginning had perhaps a plan of action or regulations to start addressing some transboundary disease. When this disease came, the entire country, the agencies had to work to update that plan. But the reality is that what I want to specify here is that this is the time for other countries to work on updating their plans of action. This is well, we heard a series of presentations on how to address African swine fever and how to address it and different experiences. But what I would like to say here is that right now what we have is to focus our efforts on updating our emergency plans. Once the disease arrives, we can work on it because, well, the Dominican Republic had its plan somewhat outdated, and it was difficult to work on updating the plan, but it is necessary, and we have been able to excel in this. This must be in writing, and not just that. We must create awareness among all the staff at the veterinary services how to work on this. As Dr. Ureña said, yes, we had a plan. It had needed to be updated, but most of the staff was really not aware of that. So we had to work down all these lines. So the first thing we want to highlight is that we need to have a plan right now, and we need to train our staff, our people, and socialize this with the veterinary service. We believe that is the number one action at this time. And the second one that we want to highlight is conversations between the public and the private sector. Why? As Dr. Ureñas was just saying, at the time of the emergency, the Dominican government basically did all it could to fight the disease and worked with the support of friendly governments that gave us a lot of support and continue to give us a lot of support in economic and technical terms and international cooperation, etc., etc. But it was not until we had this conversation between the public and private sectors was that the private sector felt it was empowered to take part in all of this. Okay, the veterinary service will do its part, but we as private sector have to guide all this effort. So when that happened here in the DR, there were huge strides made, and we got to the point where we are right now with excellent control. I just wanted to mention those two elements. We are open to any question. And once again, Erica, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Alonso, for participating. Yes, I do highlight Alonso's recommendations. It is very important for us to all be prepared. As international and regional organizations, we are trying to work with the countries so that they have their surveillance and response plans ready. But the biggest responsibility also lies on the official veterinary services and their interaction with the private sector. So I do share Alonso's words, and I urge you to be prepared. The Dominican Republic has struggled with this disease. It is so aggressive. And the results, as Dr. Ureña clearly said, the only solution for that is to eliminate the animals. So let us try to be prepared and prevent it in as much as possible. I believe that with this, first of all, I would like to thank all the panelists for their excellent presentations. I am very happy. All the information that has been shared, remember that all this information is very valuable and will be uploaded on the platform. Miguel, if you could add the link so that everyone can access the platform that will have all the videos and platforms and presentations. So I would like to call upon the panelists. We are running a bit over time, but I would not want to go without answering a few questions. For Dr. Martinez also, she can help us with this section part too. So let us begin. Dr. Katia, perhaps I can pose one question, you can pose the other one. Okay. Okay, as usual. Okay. Okay, we have the first one for Dr. Gary. For that excellent presentation. In fact, let me tell you, Dr. Gary, we're going to have to talk to you later to see if you can give us documents also as to the procedures themselves. But anyway, the question comes from Tomás Daniel Reyes, and it says, what would be the most the cheapest disposal method for swine that you would recommend for Latin America?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So this is for disposal, not depopulation, correct? So for disposal, I have two preferences. Okay, great. Gracias. I have two preferences for disposal. One is composting. The other is shallow burial with carbon. And there's also deep burial as well. So, but the key about deep burial is it is always a challenge because of the groundwater resources. So there might be high ground or mountainous areas where that is appropriate if you have a sufficient amount of soil cover. But I'm always concerned about what happens to the viruses in that deep burial environment because it doesn't break down very well. So that's why I prefer the more biologically active disposal methods. Composting, both composting in shallow burial with carbon can very quickly inactivate the pathogens, which is key. The thing about composting is there tends to be some hesitancy because it requires some management, particularly for backyard farms. Having that management over the course of a month or two or three is cumbersome. For a large commercial operation, that can be done, but it can be cumbersome. I like shallow barrel because it addresses both the biosecurity issue associated with being able to inactivate those pathogens, plus it addresses the biosecurity, I'm sorry, the environmental issues that come from deep burial. So in a lot of environments, it's going to be that shallow barrel with carbon that I prefer as the cheapest, simplest method that is going to be both protective of biosecurity and environmental resources. And you mentioned resources, so I I somehow deleted this slide from the presentation I showed earlier, so I just pulled it up now just to show you a couple of resources that are available out there. These are some resources I helped write for FAO, but also USDA on how to implement some of these disposal methods. So I'll stop sharing those now.
Yo me uno al saludo de Erika y a
I
agradecerles
would
a
like
todos los
to
panelistas
thank
también
all
por la
panelists
presentación.
also for their
De parte
presentations.
del grupo de GIF
I
que
echo
nos
Erica.
encargamos de
As
preparar
part
esta
of the
agenda de
GIF
trabajo.
that has prepared this
La
work
siguiente
agenda, I am
pregunta
very
para
grateful. The next
para
question,
el tiempo
to
para
not take too
Dr.
much
Flory.
time, is for Dr.
Flores
Flory.
nuevamente.
Flory, great to see
Es
you again.
relacionada
And
a
this question
más
is
bien
about,
si existe algún mecanismo para
is there
mitigar
any mechanism
la excavación que
to
hacen las
mitigate
carroñeras o
how
que pueden haber en
the
Una vez
birds of
se
prey
utiliza la
carry out
metodología
in different countries,
luego
the
aplica positivamente en
scavengers,
otros países,
the
sobre todo
scavengers,
utilizando
particularly when we talk about the shallow
opinión de la doctora
uh,
de Trinidad y Tobago,
uh,
la delegada Lisa Musay.
disposal. The
Yeah,
question
that's
is
a
from Trinidad and Tobago, sorry.
really good question. And so the key, the most important thing is how you place those animals. I know that they are very shallow since they're going on top of that 30 centimeters of carbon, so they're right at ground level. The key is when you place those animals, you want to make sure that those animals are lying flat in the trench so that you don't have legs that are sticking up or you don't have a snout that's right at the edge, and making sure that you get that good 60 centimeters of soil covering all of the animals. That's the most important thing, because if you're not intentional about how you return that soil so that you don't have that nice 60 centimeters of soil covering all portions of the animal carcasses, then you have greater chances of scavenger activity. There are other things that you can do. You saw in that one example where they were particularly concerned about it. They put up a fence. That is a lot of effort, and I don't know that we're going to see that happening in most cases, but there might be places, say in a commercial swine environment, where that's appropriate. The other thing that we have used is landscaping fabric. So we call it jute matting. It's made up of a fiber that breaks down over time. Here we use it on steep slopes when they're building new roads to help stabilize the roads. We can put that over top of the mound as you plant the grass. The grass grows through it. Ultimately, it breaks down, but it does also prevent some of that scavenger activity. But again, the key is to make sure that you're covering up the soil well. If you're talking specifically about vultures, we don't encounter that a lot here. We do sometimes with composting with large operations. We've actually hung vulture effigies up. So either that be a fake vulture carcass or a real vulture carcass up, and that keeps the other vultures away. So we've done that more for composting, but if that was a significant concern, then that could be used for shallow barrel with carbon also.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor
Thank you
Gary,
very much, Dr.
por su
Gary.
respuesta. Todavía hay otra pregunta para
There is
usted.
still one more question for
Nos
you.
pregunta Alejandro
Now,
Pérez.
Alejandro Perez here is
¿Hay
asking,
estudios
are there
sobre la
studies
selección del
on
personal para
selecting
conformar el
staff
equipo de trabajo de
to create
sacrificio y el
the
impacto
slaughter
psicológico
team and the
para estas
psychological
tareas?
impact these tasks may have?
Yeah, that is a really excellent question and something we have been evaluating more over the recent years, because we do recognize that these are not activities for everyone. These are very these tasks are hard work. And we often find that this can have permanent effects, emotional effects on people. We have a new tool that we use now. Basically, it is a assessment that after a depopulation, we can either go through it as a group or go through it individually. And it basically asks you to think about, how do you feel? What went well? What didn't go well? Are there some things that you need to talk about? And we actually also are at a place that if you go through that tool and you're still feeling impacted by those depopulation activities, we also provide a number that which you can talk to a professional about what you're feeling. So the emotional impact on depopulating large numbers of animals, like in an ASF outbreak, are real. And we need to understand that not everybody is designed for that. Ironically, we find veterinarians are particularly impacted by depopulation. They spend their entire lives trying to make animals well and to keep them healthy. And the implications of depopulation can be very difficult for veterinarians. So, in terms of choosing which people, I'm not aware of any research on that, but we are being more engaged in the emotional health of people who are responsible for depopulation, having more open discussions that used to be taboo, in years past where it was considered a weakness to say that bothered you. But now we recognize that those feelings are real and we need to acknowledge them and discuss what we're feeling and determine whether this is an activity that we should continue to be doing.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you.
Gary.
Thank
Adelante,
you,
doctora
Gary.
Martínez.
Go ahead, Dr. Martinez.
Hola, para continuar con esta
Okay,
parte,
to
voy a
continue with
saltar un
this
poco
part,
para no
I
dejar
will
el resto de los
jump
participantes sin
around to
consultas.
to
Sé que el
share
doctor Duffy ya nos
questions.
presentó algo de la
I know
información adicional.
Dr. Duffy presented
Una de
some
las cosas que
additional
nos piden
information. One
es
thing
si
that we
podría
are
ampliar la
asked, or
información en
is you
cuanto a las
can elaborate on the
recomendaciones de la
information
OMSA en
as to
eliminación de animales desde dispositivos de
provisions
compartimentos, pero manejando
regarding compartment, but
dejadas de
handling,
extracción en este tipo de
excuse me,
compartimentos.
the carcasses in
Te escucho.
compartments. Dr. Duffy.
Sí. A ver,
Okay,
con
let's see.
respecto a las disposiciones de la
As
OIE
to
para eliminación de animales y eso, hay
provisions
un
for
capítulo específico dentro del
disposal,
código
there's a
que
specific
creo que
chapter in the code,
deberían recurrir y leer.
which I
Ese
believe you
capítulo de
should
relación que ese
read,
capítulo puede
and the
tener con
connection
otros.
that may have with others.
Con respecto
Now,
a más información sobre
as to further information on compartmentalization,
no hay mucha
particularly,
información.
there really is not
La
all that much
realidad
information.
es
The
que
truth is
muchos
that
países han conseguido
not many
establecer
countries have been able to,
a ver, muchos países
let's
han
see,
establecido
okay,
compartimentos.
many countries have
Lo
established
que no ha
compartments,
sido
yes,
tan
but
frecuente,
what
por
has
no
not
decir
been as frequent,
escasamente
to
frecuente,
not say
es el
scarce,
reconocimiento por
is
parte de un país
recognition
exportador de ese
of an
compartimento.
importing
Ha
country
habido algunos casos.
regarding that compartment.
Tiene
There are
algunas
some cases like South
publicaciones
Africa
acerca
where
de
they
cómo
have
lo
some
hizo.
publications on how they
Traslado de
went about it
porcina africana,
regarding
pero
the
para
African
exportar a
swine
otros
fever,
países
but
de
to
África,
export to other
no
African
a
countries
países
only,
libres
not to
de peste porcina africana.
AFS-free countries
Y la otra pregunta que me hizo, ¿cuál era?
in the rest of the world. And the other question, what was it?
Para los temas de eliminación de cadáveres en compartimentos.
The disposal of animals in compartments. Okay. Their disposal of animals really does not need much. Let's see. We aspire, we would hope that the compartment safeguards the sanitary status, but if unfortunately should the event come, at least one would hope that this is confined or limited to one or a few components within that compartment. And each one of those components, the animal disposal methods have already been mentioned in great detail. They would not be anything different from disposing of a whole farm or a small farm in a region. Okay, thank you, Dr. Duffy. Continuing, let's see. We have 5 more minutes to go, so this is the last question for Dr. Ureña. The question here is for Dr. Ureña or for Alonso also. Daniel Martinez is that animals in a trench, are there problems with the gases when the bodies decompose? Right now, we have no problem. The only problem was that when we were not adding those pipes, there were ditches that exploded. That was the only problem. The trench during those 72 hours were under surveillance of the military to avoid it being outsiders getting in there. So there were really never any reports of that at all. Okay, thank you very much. I wonder whether Alonso would like to add anything. Otherwise, with this, we can start wrapping up. Gary, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add the other thing that I have done is, unless they're calling for significant rainfall, I might only put 30 or 60 centimeters of soil in that trench for that first week or two. And then after that, once those animals have off gas, some of that methane that's being generated, then I would go in and put the soil, the remaining soil back on the trench. So that's another way. I mean, the pipes are certainly good too, as you did. But the other way is don't put all of your soil in, don't compact it, just put enough in there to keep scavengers out. And then as that off-gassing occurs over that first week or two, then you can go back in and cap the site.
Perfecto, muchas gracias
Perfect. Oh, that was great addition. Dr. Ureña, did you have something to add? Yes, thank you. With the gassing off the end, we would, yes, that is right. We have added more soil. Well, unfortunately, we have many questions, but very little time. So we are going to have to leave it at this point today. Dr. Gary has shown us that there are some documents. We can put those links on the platform with all the information from these webinars. We will add all the presentations, as I said before, as well as the video. All these webinars, I mean, you can see previous webinars. Those are all on the website. So use those to train more people in your countries. This has been a big interagency effort, and there's very valuable information on platform so that you can take advantage of it. With this, I would like to thank Dr. Gary Flory for his excellent presentation. Always with us. We like that. He is a very close friend of IICA and of other institutions. So thank you very much. Dr. Clifford, who was here with us, Dr. Duffy, very good presentation also. Dr. Ureña, Dr. Stefani, that shared their experience also. Thank you so much for sharing it. This is all. I would like to thank the team, all the institutions that have been involved in this collaboration, all the IICA people that are behind scenes, and thank you very much. Have a wonderful end of the year and a new year, and hope to see you then next year. Dr. Martinez, closing remarks? Okay, thank you all very much. We organized this pretty much in a haste, but this was very relevant to consider in detail. So we thank the speakers, as Erica was saying. Dr. Flory for his experience. The development of that WOA standard, it does not apply the same if you read it or if you get such a wonderful explanation as we did today. Dr. Flory's experience is excellent. The OIRSA team's experience, and Dr. Ureña is responsible for the swine issue in the country, has been an excellent contribution that can help us in this preparedness for the different regions. So we have achieved, I guess, we reached our goal for this webinar, and we can consider if that we would thank the speakers if they want to participate with us again in the future. As the information shared by Dr. Sergio, we can follow the different chapters that he mentioned and the terrestrial code. These could help with to develop or to work on the different diseases depending on the experience of each country. Thank you all very much. Erica, the floor is yours finally. Okay, just before we go, I remind you, copy the link so that you can fill out the survey. It is very important for this group. So please visit the platform. This will be housed on the related institutions. So thank you all panelists again, and happy holidays everyone with your families. Thank you. Goodbye.